There are some things that should not be spoken, some memories that should remain locked away in the vaults of the mind, sealed behind walls of adamantium and time, buried so deep that even the most persistent inquiries cannot reach them. In the grim darkness of the far future, where the Imperium of man teeters on the brink of annihilation, there exist warriors who have walked the battlefields of the galaxy for 10,000 years. Encased in walking tombs of ceramite and steel, these ancient dreadnoughts are living relics, bridges to an age of legends that the modern Imperium can scarcely comprehend. They have witnessed the fall of civilizations, the death of stars, and the corruption of heroes who once stood as paragons of virtue. Among these ancients, there are those who carry a burden heavier than the armor that imprisons them. They are the survivors of Isstvan V, the witnesses to the drop site massacre, the ones who saw the Imperium shatter before their very optical senses. They walked the black sands of that cursed world. They felt the shock waves of betrayal ripple through their legions. They watched brothers turn on brothers with a savagery that defied all understanding. They saw a Primarch die, beheaded by one who had been his closest friend. They experienced the moment when the Great Crusade's dream burned to ash in the fires of treachery, and they will not speak of it. Ask any chapter's librarian for accounts of Isstvan, and you will find tactical reports, casualty assessments, and strategic analyses compiled by those who came after. You will discover second-hand testimonies, reconstructed timelines, and scholarly interpretations written by historians who were not there. But approach the ancient dreadnoughts themselves, those few remaining warriors who actually stood upon that killing field, and you will encounter only silence. A silence so profound, so absolute, that it speaks louder than any words could ever articulate. This is not the silence of forgotten memories or faded recollections. This is the silence of those who remember everything, but cannot bear to give voice to what they witnessed. In the sepulchres, where these ancient warriors sleep between battles, in the deep halls of fortress monasteries scattered across the galaxy, they rest in their sarcophagi like metal caskets in a vast mausoleum. When they are awakened for war or council, they will speak of countless battles. They will recount the fall of Xenos empires, describe the tactics used against chaos incursions, and share wisdom gleaned from millennia of warfare. They will answer questions about their Primarch's teachings, about the old ways of their legions before they became chapters, about battles fought on worlds whose names have been lost to the passage of ages. But mention Isstvan, speak of the drop site massacre, ask them what it felt like to be there when the Imperium broke, and watch as an invisible door slams shut. Watch as warriors who have faced daemons and tyrannids without flinching suddenly find reasons to fall silent. Watch as voices that have thundered across battlefields for 10,000 years simply cease to speak. This is not cowardice. These are warriors who have continued to serve the Emperor long past the point where death would have been a mercy. This is not senility or the degradation of memory that comes with extreme age. The mind impulse units that connect their consciousness to their mechanical shells preserve their recollections with mechanical precision, cataloguing each detail with the cold efficiency of a data slate. No, the silence of the Isstvan dreadnoughts is something far more complex, far more human than simple forgetting or fear. It is a silence born of trauma so profound that it cannot be adequately expressed, of witnessing an atrocity so fundamental that describing it would be to relive it. It is the silence of those who saw the moment when hope died and everything they had believed in was revealed as fragile as morning frost. Before we can understand why these ancient warriors will not speak of Isstvan, we must first understand what it means to be a dreadnought. We must grasp the nature of their existence, the prison they inhabit, and the unique perspective their condition imposes upon their experience of reality. Imagine for a moment that you are a space marine, one of the Emperor's chosen warriors. You are more than human, your body transformed by genetic enhancement and surgical modification into a living weapon. You have fought across 100 worlds. You have stood shoulder to shoulder with your brothers, united in purpose and bound by an unbreakable bond of loyalty. You are invincible, or so you believe, until the day when you are not. The day when a weapon finds its mark, when armor fails, when flesh tears and bones shatter. The day when you fall. For most warriors, this is where the story ends. Death comes swiftly to the battlefield, and there is honor in such a passing. But if you are deemed valuable enough, if your experience and wisdom are considered too precious to lose, if your broken body is recovered before it expires completely, then a different fate awaits you. Not death, but something that exists in the shadowed space between life and death. You are chosen for interment within a dreadnought. The process begins with what remains of your shattered form being rushed to the apothecarian. Tech marines and apothecaries work in concert, performing a surgery that is equal parts medical procedure and machine right. What cannot be saved is removed. Limbs that will never function again are severed. Organs too damaged to repair are extracted. Your body is reduced to its essential components: a torso, vital organs, the brain and central nervous system that contain everything you are. This biological remnant is then carefully placed within a sarcophagus, an armored life support pod that will sustain what is left of you for centuries, for millennia, perhaps forever. The sarcophagus is filled with amniotic fluid, thick and cold like oil. This liquid becomes your atmosphere, your sustainer, flowing into your lungs with each mechanical breath. It is numbingly cold against what remains of your flesh, a constant reminder of your transformation. Neural interface cables are driven into your brain and spinal column, creating permanent connections between your consciousness and the machine that will become your new body. The black carapace that once allowed you to interface with your power armor is repurposed, fused into systems that will let you control tons of ceramite and adamantium as easily as you once controlled your own flesh. When the process is complete, when the last ritual has been performed and the final prayer has been spoken, the sarcophagus is sealed. You are encased in absolute darkness, suspended in fluid, connected to a machine that will interpret your thoughts and translate them into movement. This is not like wearing armor. This is total sensory replacement. Your eyes no longer see, replaced by optical sensors that feed data directly into your brain. Your ears no longer hear natural sound, but instead process audio input through mechanical filters. Touch becomes pressure readings transmitted through ceramite plating. The warm blood flowing through your veins becomes hydraulic fluid coursing through servo systems. Everything you experience is mediated through the machine. When you grip something with your power fist, you do not feel the crushing of metal or the breaking of bone. You receive data that informs you these things are happening, but the sensation, the tactile reality of it, is gone. When you walk, you do not feel the ground beneath your feet, because you no longer have feet. You sense weight distribution. You monitor balance through gyroscopic systems. But the simple act of taking a step has become an abstraction. You are piloting your body rather than inhabiting it. This fundamental disconnection from physical reality affects everything, including memory. As a flesh and blood warrior, your memories were anchored in sensory experience. You remembered not just what you saw, but how the air smelled, how your armor felt against your skin, the taste of recaf before battle, the sound of your brother's laughter in the halls of the fortress monastery. These sensory details formed the texture of memory, the framework upon which experience was built. But as a dreadnought, all of that is filtered through mechanical systems. The smell of smoke is a chemical analysis. The touch of a weapon is a pressure reading. The sound of battle is audio data. Over time, as centuries blur into millennia, as you are awakened and return to stasis over and over again, those organic memories begin to fade. not because your mind fails, but because they are no longer reinforced by similar sensory experiences. Each new memory is formed in the cold language of machine data, and the old memories, the human memories, become increasingly foreign. They feel like someone else's experiences, stories you were told rather than things you lived through. The gap between what you were and what you have become grows wider with each awakening. And then there is the sleep. Between battles, when you are not needed, you are returned to stasis. The Tech Marines perform their rituals of preservation, anointing your chassis with sacred oils and chanting the litanies of maintenance. Then power is gradually reduced, systems cycle down, and consciousness fades. This is not true sleep as mortals understand it. It is not rest or recuperation. It is a kind of death, a cessation of experience that could last for years or decades or centuries. When you are awakened, it might be to a galaxy you no longer recognize. The brothers you fought beside may be long dead, their names recorded only in the chapter's histories. The enemies you faced may have been defeated generations ago. New threats may have emerged that you have never encountered. The very language spoken by your chapter might have shifted, ancient dialects giving way to new forms. You wake to find yourself increasingly isolated, a relic from an age that has passed into legend, speaking to warriors who see you not as a brother, but as a venerated ancestor. This is the existence of every dreadnought, but for those who witnessed Isstvan, for those who were there when the drop site massacre unfolded, this isolation is compounded by the nature of what they experienced. They carry memories that no one else who survived can share, because so few survived. They remember a truth, that the Imperium has spent 10,000 years trying to process and comprehend. And the machine that preserves their consciousness also preserves every terrible detail of that day with unforgiving clarity. To understand why the Isstvan dreadnoughts will not speak, we must first understand what happened on that cursed world. We must walk through the events that led to the drop site massacre, must see the trap as it was sprung, must witness the moment when brother turned on brother and the galaxy changed forever. The year was 006, the 31st Millennium. The Great Crusade, that magnificent undertaking to reunite humanity under the banner of the Emperor, had been underway for 2 centuries. Across the galaxy, the Space Marine legions had brought world after world into Imperial compliance, spreading the light of the Imperial truth and crushing all opposition. At the head of this grand endeavor stood Horus Lupercal, the War Master, the Emperor's most favored son, the greatest of all the Primarchs. But Horus had fallen, corrupted by the ruinous powers, seduced by whispers of godhood and promises of power. He had turned against everything he had once stood for. The first open sign of his betrayal came at Isstvan III, a civilized world in the Isstvan system. There, Horus orchestrated a virus bombing that killed billions of Imperial citizens and betrayed the loyal elements within his own legion and those of his co-conspirators. The battle that followed in the ruins of Isstvan III's cities was brother against brother, Astartes killing Astartes in the first true conflict of what would become the Horus heresy. Word of this treachery reached Terra through the efforts of brave souls who escaped aboard the frigate Eisenstein. Rogel Dawn, Primarch of the Imperial Fists and Praetorian of Terra, received this news with barely contained fury. The Emperor's most beloved son had turned traitor. The War Master had raised his hand against the Imperium. This could not stand. A response was required, swift and overwhelming. 7 legions were dispatched to the Isstvan system to bring Horus to account. The Iron Hands, Salamanders, and Raven Guard would form the first wave, making planetfall on Isstvan V, where Horus had established his stronghold. Behind them would come the reinforcements, the Night Lords, Iron Warriors, Wordbearers, and Alpha Legion, ready to support their loyal brothers and crush the rebellion before it could spread. Or so it was believed. Ferrus Manus, Primarch of the Iron Hands, was chosen to lead the assault. The Gorgon, as he was known, was a warrior of unmatched determination and tactical brilliance. His hands, encased in living metal from his battle with the great worm Assionoth, had forged some of the finest weapons in the Imperium. His legion was known for their relentless efficiency and their close ties to the Mechanicum. If anyone could bring Horus to justice, surely it would be Ferrus Manus. But the Gorgon was also consumed by rage. Fulgrim, Primarch of the Emperor's children and once Ferrus's closest brother, had already attempted to sway him to Horus's cause. The betrayal of that friendship burned in Ferrus like a forge fire. He took only his most veteran warriors, the swiftest ships, determined to strike at the traitors before they could fortify their position further. This haste, this fury, would prove catastrophic. The Loyalist forces made planetfall on Isstvan V in the Urgal Depression, a vast volcanic plain surrounded by treacherous terrain. It was a natural killing ground, though the Loyalists did not yet know it. Horus had chosen this location with care. His strategic genius now turned to the service of the dark gods. The traitor forces were arrayed in defensive positions, fortifications bristling with heavy weapons. The ground itself turned into a death trap of minefields and concealed gun emplacements. The assault began with the fury of righteous anger. The Iron Hands, Salamanders, and Raven Guard crashed into the traitor lines like a hammer of the Emperor's wrath. For a time, it seemed they might succeed. The traitor forces fell back, their defensive lines wavering under the assault. Ferrus Manus himself led the charge, his silver hands gleaming as he cut through enemy formations with terrible purpose. Vulcan and Korax fought. Alongside him, Primarchs united in their determination to end this rebellion swiftly. Then came the moment that defined everything that followed. As the first wave of Loyalists pressed their advantage, as they drove deeper into the traitor positions, the second wave arrived. Hundreds of Stormbirds and Thunderhawks descended from the sky, battle barges in orbit disgorging the reinforcements that would surely turn this battle into a rout. The Night Lords, Iron Warriors, Wordbearers, and Alpha Legion had arrived, and they opened fire on their supposed allies. The betrayal was total and devastating. The 4 legions of the second wave had secretly sworn themselves to Horus and the ruinous powers. They had come not to reinforce the Loyalists, but to slaughter them. The trap snapped shut with brutal efficiency. The first wave was caught between the traitor forces they had been assaulting and the fresh legions that now attacked from behind. The killing ground became a massacre. Imagine the confusion, the horror of that moment. These were Space Marines who had fought side by side through countless campaigns. They knew each other's battle cries, recognized each other's heraldry, had shared victories and defeats across the stars. And now they were killing each other with a savagery that defied comprehension. The Night Lords, whose reputation for terror tactics was well earned, descended upon the Salamanders with gleeful brutality. The Iron Warriors, masters of siege warfare, systematically destroyed the dropships that might have allowed escape. The Wordbearers, who had spent decades preparing for this moment, unleashed sorceries and demoncraft that tore at reality itself. The Alpha Legion struck with surgical precision, eliminating command structures and sowing further chaos. In the center of this maelstrom, Ferrus Manus confronted Fulgrim. The 2 Primarchs met in single combat amid the carnage, former brothers now mortal enemies. Ferrus fought with the fury of betrayed friendship, his silver hands dealing blows that would have shattered mountains. But Fulgrim fought with a demon-possessed blade, the blade of Leia, a weapon of pure corruption. The duel was brief and terrible. In a single stroke, Fulgrim beheaded Ferrus Manus, the first Primarch to die in the Horus heresy. The Gorgon's head was later presented to Horus as a trophy of the traitor's victory. With their Primarch dead, the Iron Hands were thrown into disarray. Many fought on with mechanical efficiency, their hatred of weakness driving them to continue even as hope failed. They died almost to a man, veterans of 100 campaigns cut down in the volcanic dust of Isstvan V. The Salamanders, too, suffered catastrophic losses. Vulcan himself was lost in the chaos, presumed dead, though his body was never recovered. Korax of the Raven Guard managed to extract a portion of his legion, but the cost was staggering. Of the tens of thousands of Astartes who had made planetfall, only a few, thousands survived to escape. The battle lasted only hours, but those hours were an eternity of betrayal and slaughter. The Urgal Depression became a charnel house. The black sands stained crimson with the blood of the Emperor's finest warriors. Armor was shattered, gene seed harvested from the fallen by traitor apothecaries, and the bodies of heroes were left to rot in the volcanic heat. When it was over, when the last of the loyalists had been hunted down or driven off-world, Horus stood victorious. He had crippled 3 legions in a single stroke. He had killed a Primarch. He had demonstrated that his rebellion was not a minor uprising, but a civil war that would tear the Imperium apart. And through it all, there were Dreadnoughts. Ancient warriors already entombed in their walking sarcophagi, veterans of the Great Crusade who had been deemed too valuable to lose to mortal wounds. They fought in that massacre, their assault cannons and power fists dealing death to traitors, even as their brothers fell around them. They watched through optical sensors as the second wave opened fire. They registered the radio traffic filled with confused screams and desperate last words. They saw Ferrus Manus fall, saw their Primarch's head severed from his shoulders. They experienced the moment when hope died and was replaced by the cold certainty that they were all going to be slaughtered. Some of these Dreadnoughts survived, not many, for the traitors targeted them with particular fury, recognizing them as both powerful weapons and symbols of the Loyalists' strength. But some endured, their adamantium shells absorbing damage that would have destroyed lesser machines, their pilot's consciousness locked behind layers of armor and machine code, bearing witness to horrors that would haunt them for 10,000 years. These are the warriors who will not speak of Isstvan. These are the ancients who carry that day inside their metal shells like a poison that cannot be purged. And to understand why they remain silent, we must understand what it means to carry such memories when you cannot die and cannot forget. The Iron Hands lost most of their Dreadnoughts at Isstvan. The Legion had always maintained a large and sophisticated arsenal of war machines, their close ties to the Mechanicum, ensuring they possessed some of the finest and oldest Dreadnought chassis in the Imperium. Contemptor-patterned Dreadnoughts, relics from the early days of the Great Crusade, strode into battle alongside their newer Castraferum cousins. Within these machines were warriors who had fought since the beginning, who had stood with Ferrus Manus when he was first reunited with his legion, who remembered when the Emperor walked among them as a physical presence rather than a distant ideal. When the trap was sprung at Isstvan, these Dreadnoughts found themselves in a unique hell. Their advanced targeting systems allowed them to track the battle with mechanical precision. They could identify friend from foe, even in the chaos of close combat, could calculate trajectories and threat assessments with computer-aided accuracy. This meant they saw everything, every bolt round that found its mark in a brother's armor, every chain blade that carved through ceramite, every instance of a brother they had fought beside for decades being cut down by someone they had considered an ally. The few Iron Hands Dreadnoughts who survived Isstvan became the seeds from which the chapter would rebuild. They carried not just tactical knowledge, but the memory of what the Legion had been before the massacre. They remembered the Gorgon's final moments, could replay them in perfect detail through their recorded sensor logs. But they do not share these recordings. They do not speak of watching their father die. The data exists in their archives, time-stamped and catalogued with mechanical precision, but it remains locked away behind walls of refusal. The Salamanders, too, had Dreadnoughts present at the massacre. Their chapter maintains fewer such machines than some others, for the sons of Vulcan value the human element, and are reluctant to entomb their brothers unless absolutely necessary. But those Salamanders Dreadnoughts who fought at Isstvan carry a particular burden. They saw Vulcan disappear in the atomic fire of an Iron Warrior's bombardment. They do not know with certainty what became of their Primarch, for his body was never recovered, and the truth of his nature as a perpetual would not be fully understood for years to come. This uncertainty compounds their trauma. They watch their father fall, but cannot testify to his death because they did not witness it directly. They experience the moment when their legion's command structure collapsed, when warriors who had always looked to Vulcan for guidance suddenly found themselves leaderless in the midst of the worst betrayal in Imperial history. The psychological impact of losing a Primarch goes beyond mere tactics or morale. For a Space Marine, the Primarch is father, commander, and the living embodiment of everything the Legion represents. To lose that anchor, to watch that pillar of certainty crumble, is to experience a fundamental crisis of identity. The Raven Guard Dreadnoughts who survived were perhaps the most fortunate, if such a word can be applied to any who lived through that day. Corax managed to extract a portion of his legion, and the Raven Guard's expertise in stealth and rapid deployment meant that more of their warriors escaped than from the other two legions. But the Raven Guard Dreadnoughts still carry the weight of that failure. They were there when the second wave arrived. They calculated the odds shifting from possible victory to certain annihilation. They witnessed the systematic slaughter of their brothers and were powerless to prevent it. Across all three legions, these dreadnoughts share a common experience. They survived when so many did not. They endured when their Primarchs fell or disappeared. They were extracted from the battlefield, loaded onto ships, and carried away from Isstvan, while thousands of their brothers were left behind to die. Survivor's guilt is a weight that would crush a mortal human. For a Space Marine, for a dreadnought who will carry that guilt for millennia, it becomes a burden beyond description. But the Isstvan dreadnoughts are not unique in having experienced the Horus heresy. There are other ancients, warriors, who fought through those terrible years and emerged on the other side. The most famous of these is Bjorn the Fell-Handed of the Space Wolves, who fought at the side of Leman Russ himself and witnessed the Emperor before his internment in the Golden Throne. Bjorn will speak, grudgingly, of his experiences during the heresy. He will recount battles, describe tactics, even share personal anecdotes about the Primarchs he encountered. His service to his chapter includes passing on the knowledge of that era, ensuring that the lessons learned in blood are not forgotten. So why will Bjorn speak when the Isstvan dreadnoughts will not? The answer lies in the nature of the trauma itself. Bjorn fought at Prospero, witnessed the destruction of another Astartes legion, saw brother turn against brother when the Space Wolves burned the Thousand Suns homeworld. He experienced betrayal and horror, watched friends die and enemies rise from impossible odds. But Prospero, for all its tragedy, was different from Isstvan in one crucial respect. At Prospero, the Space Wolves believed they were following the Emperor's will. They thought they were executing justified punishment against traitors. The moral clarity, however false it might have been, provided a framework for understanding the violence. At Isstvan, there was no such clarity. The Loyalists were not executing traitors. They were being slaughtered by warriors they had trusted. They were not following orders from terror. They were dying in a trap sprung by those who should have been their reinforcements. The betrayal was absolute and without warning. One moment, they were fighting alongside brothers, and the next, those same brothers were killing them. There was no time to process, no framework to understand, just the immediate and visceral reality of total treachery. This distinction matters when it comes to memory and trauma. A horrible event that can be placed within a narrative, even a tragic one, is easier to speak about than an event that shatters all narrative frameworks. Bjorn can speak of Prospero because, however much he might regret it in hindsight, it made sense within the context of the heresy. The Isstvan dreadnoughts cannot speak of the massacre because it made no sense even in the moment. It was pure chaos, pure betrayal, a complete destruction of everything they had believed about their brothers and the Imperium they served. Moreover, the Isstvan survivors carry a specific kind of knowledge that is dangerous to share. They saw not just that the heresy happened, but how it happened. They witnessed the mechanics of betrayal, the specific ways that trusted allies turned into mortal enemies. They experienced the psychological moment when the Imperium broke, when the certainty of brotherhood was revealed as an illusion. To speak of this in detail, To describe the precise nature of that betrayal would be to risk spreading the poison of doubt. What if the same could happen again? What if the chapters that now stand as loyal could be corrupted as thoroughly as the legions were? These are questions that the Imperium cannot afford to ask, and the Isstvan Dreadnoughts know this. When a dreadnought is awakened, the process is gradual and often disorienting. Power is restored to the sarcophagus in stages. Life support systems come online first, ensuring that the biological remnant within survives the transition from stasis to consciousness. Then, the neural interfaces activate, reconnecting the pilot's mind to the machine body. Optical sensors flicker to life, displaying data that the pilot's brain has to relearn how to interpret. Audio systems engage, filtering sound through mechanical processes. Finally, full consciousness returns, and the dreadnought remembers what and who they are. For dreadnoughts, with millennia of service, each awakening is an exercise in loss. They wake to find that more time has passed, that more brothers they once knew are dead, that the galaxy has continued to change in their absence. But they also wake with their memories largely intact, preserved by the machine systems that now house their consciousness. Unlike mortal humans, whose memories fade and blur with time, dreadnoughts retain crystal-clear recollections of events that occurred thousands of years ago. The mind impulse units that connect their organic brain to the machine record everything with perfect fidelity. This perfect recall is both blessing and curse. A dreadnought can remember tactics used in battles fought 3,000 years ago, can recall the specific words of advice given by a Primarch during the Great Crusade, can provide eyewitness testimony to events that have passed into myth for everyone else. But this same clarity of recall means they cannot escape from traumatic memories. Where a mortal human might find their painful memories softening with time, becoming more abstract and less visceral, a dreadnought experiences trauma with the same intensity every time they access the memory. For the Isstvan survivors, this means that every time they think about the massacre, they re-experience it with sensory detail that a mortal could never maintain. They can replay the exact sequence of events that led to Ferrus Manus's death. They can reconstruct the moment when they realized the second wave was attacking them. They can remember the specific voice patterns of brothers screaming over the Vox as they were cut down. The machine preserves it all, time-stamped and categorized. An archive of horror that cannot be deleted or allowed to fade. But there is a wrinkle in this perfect preservation. While the data is recorded with machine precision, the emotional context, the human meaning of these events, becomes increasingly difficult to access. Over centuries and millennia, as the biological component of a dreadnought's consciousness becomes more thoroughly integrated with the machine, there develops a kind of emotional disconnection. The memories are there, but they begin to feel like recordings rather than experiences, like data files rather than lived moments. This disconnection is a survival mechanism, though not one that the dreadnought chooses consciously. The human mind was not designed to carry the weight of 10,000 years of experience. It was not meant to remember every battle, every death, every moment of fear and fury across millennia. The gradual integration with the machine provides a kind of emotional insulation, a way of maintaining functional continuity, even as the sheer volume of memory threatens to overwhelm consciousness. For the Isstvan dreadnoughts, this means they exist in a strange state regarding their most traumatic memories. They remember the massacre with perfect clarity. They can access every detail, every moment, every sensory input that was recorded. But the emotional weight of those memories, the visceral horror of experiencing betrayal on such a scale, has become muted. They know intellectually that it was terrible. They understand that it shaped the course of galactic history, but they no longer feel it with the same raw intensity that they did in the immediate aftermath. This creates a paradox when it comes to speaking about Isstvan. On one hand, the emotional distance might make it easier to discuss the events clinically, to provide tactical analysis without being overwhelmed by trauma. On the other hand, this very distance is part of what makes them reluctant to speak, because they know that if they were to truly convey what happened, they would need to bridge that gap, to find a way to communicate not just the facts, but the feeling. And in trying to do so, they would risk reactivating the emotional components of those memories, breaking through the protective distance that has allowed them to continue functioning. Moreover, they are acutely aware that no one who was not there can truly understand. The younger Space Marines who seek their counsel were born centuries or millennia after Isstvan. They live in an Imperium that has always been fractured, where the existence of traitor legions is simply a fact of reality rather than a shattering betrayal. These younger warriors cannot comprehend what it was like when the legions were unified, when the concept of an Astartes turning against his brothers was unthinkable. To explain Isstvan to them would require first explaining an entire worldview that no longer exists, a context that has been lost to history. Imagine trying to describe betrayal to someone who has never experienced trust. That is the challenge facing the Isstvan Dreadnoughts when younger brothers ask them about the massacre. How do you convey the shock of that betrayal when the questioner has grown up in a galaxy where such betrayals are common? How do you communicate the magnitude of that loss when the person asking never knew the unity that was shattered? The gap is too wide, the contextual knowledge too divergent, for meaningful communication to occur. And so they remain silent, not out of an inability to remember or articulate, but out of a recognition that true understanding is impossible. They carry their memories in cold storage, archived and preserved, accessible but not shared. They function as tactical advisors and combat assets, contributing to their chapter's victories without burdening younger brothers with knowledge that would only breed questions without answers, doubts without resolution. The specific trauma of Isstvan cannot be understood without grasping the fundamental nature of what was destroyed there. This was not just a military defeat, though it was certainly that. This was not merely the death of a primarch, though Ferrus Manus's beheading was a catastrophic loss. What was destroyed at Isstvan was the very concept of brotherhood that had defined the Space Marine legions. Consider what it meant to be part of a legion during the Great Crusade. You were not just a soldier in an army. You were part of a brotherhood that transcended normal human bonds. You shared gene seed that traced back to your primarch, a genetic connection that made you literally brothers in biology as well as in purpose. You trained together from the moment of your transformation, learning to fight as a single organism spread across thousands of individual warriors. You relied on each other absolutely, your life in the hands of your brothers and their lives in yours. This trust was not abstract or theoretical. It was tested in every battle, proven in every campaign. When you made planetfall in a drop pod, you did so knowing that your brothers would be there, covering your advance, securing your flanks, dying to protect you if necessary. When you called for fire support, you knew it would come. When you needed extraction, you knew someone would fight through hell itself to reach you. This certainty was the foundation of everything the legions accomplished. The Great Crusade reinforced this brotherhood across legion lines. You might have rivalries with other legions, might consider their tactics inferior or their primarchs less worthy than your own, but you did not doubt their fundamental loyalty to the Emperor and the Imperium. An Iron Hands warrior might mock a Raven Guard's reliance on stealth instead of direct assault, but he knew that when battle was joined, the Raven Guard would fight with the same dedication and skill. A Salamander might disagree with the Iron Warrior's ruthless tactics, but he trusted that they were all working toward the same goal. Then came Isstvan, and in a few bloody hours, all of that certainty was destroyed. The warriors who were supposed to be reinforcements, who had traveled through the warp specifically to support the Loyalist assault, instead opened fire on their supposed allies. The trust that had been built over 2 centuries of crusading together was shattered in an instant. Worse, the betrayal was not spontaneous or accidental. It was planned, coordinated, executed with the same precision that these legions had once used to conquer human and Xeno empires. This was not warriors losing control or being corrupted in the heat of battle. This was cold, calculated treachery. For the Dreadnoughts who witnessed this, the psychological impact cannot be overstated. They had existed as warriors longer than most, had fought through more campaigns than the newly inducted Space Marines around them. Their entire existence was predicated on the certainty of brotherhood, on the fundamental trust that allowed Astartes to function as a cohesive force. To see that trust weaponized, to watch brothers who should have been allies methodically slaughter the very warriors they had come to support, was to experience a kind of existential collapse. And they were helpless to stop it. This is a crucial aspect of the trauma that is often overlooked. Dreadnoughts are powerful, yes. They carry heavy weapons capable of destroying armored vehicles. They can crush enemies with power fists and stomp them beneath adamantium feet. But they are also slow and cumbersome compared to regular Space Marines. They cannot dodge as quickly, cannot take cover as effectively, cannot adapt to rapidly changing tactical situations with the same agility. At Isstvan, this meant that Dreadnoughts who saw the betrayal unfolding could not respond fast enough to make a difference. They watched their brothers being murdered and could not reach them in time. They identified threats and opened fire. But for every traitor they killed, dozens more were slaughtering loyalists. They were powerful enough to know they should be able to change the outcome, but not powerful enough to actually do so. This combination of capability and helplessness, of being a weapon of war who cannot prevent a massacre, created a particular kind of psychological wound. Imagine the specific horror of being able to calculate exactly how many of your brothers are dying per minute, being able to project casualty rates and predict the outcome of the battle, all while being unable to change that outcome. The Dreadnoughts' enhanced targeting systems and tactical cogitators gave them this capability. They could see the battle unfolding with machine precision, could track the movement of forces, could understand that the trap had been sprung and that there was no escape, and they could do nothing but fight on, dealing what damage they could, while watching their legion die around them. The death of Ferrus Manus added another layer to this trauma. Primarchs were not supposed to die. This sounds naive in the 41st millennium, when every Imperial citizen knows that half the Primarchs turned traitor, and that Horus himself was slain by the Emperor. But during the Great Crusade, Primarchs had seemed genuinely immortal. They had survived wounds that would have killed any other being. They had conquered impossible odds and emerged victorious. They were the Emperor's own sons, demigods who stood between humanity and the horrors of the galaxy. For an Iron Hands Dreadnought to watch Ferrus Manus fall, to witness the Gorgon's head severed from his shoulders by Fulgrim's blade, was to see the impossible made real. Everything they had believed about the fundamental order of the universe was proven false in that single moment. If a Primarch could die, if the greatest of the Emperor's sons could be slain by his own brother, then nothing was certain. All the assumptions that had allowed them to function, to maintain hope and faith and purpose, were revealed as illusions. The specific circumstances of Ferrus's death made it even worse. This was not a glorious last stand against overwhelming odds. This was not a tactical sacrifice to allow his legion to escape. This was Ferrus's rage and grief at Fulgrim's betrayal overcoming his tactical judgment, leading him to charge into the traitor lines without proper support. The Dreadnoughts who witnessed this saw their Primarch, normally a paragon of strategic brilliance, consumed by emotion to the point of recklessness. They watched him fall, not because the enemy was stronger, but because betrayal had wounded him so deeply that he could not think clearly, and they could not reach him. They could not fight their way through the mass of traitors to stand at their father's side in his final moments. They could only watch, recording everything through their optical sensors, as Fulgrim's blade descended and the Gorgon's head was separated from his body. The helplessness of that moment, the inability to protect their Primarch, became a wound that would never heal. For Salamanders and Raven Guard Dreadnoughts, the trauma was different, but no less profound. They lost their Primarchs to uncertainty rather than confirmed death. Vulcan disappeared in fire and smoke, his ultimate fate unknown. Korax survived but was forced to retreat, abandoning thousands of his warriors to their deaths. These dreadnoughts carry the weight of not knowing, of questions that can never be adequately answered. Was there something they could have done differently? Could they have changed the outcome if they had positioned themselves better, fought harder, sacrificed more? These are questions that would torment anyone, but for a dreadnought with perfect recall and 10,000 years to review and analyze the battle, they become a form of slow torture. They can replay the events endlessly, can calculate alternative scenarios, can identify every decision point where a different choice might have led to a different outcome. And all of this analysis leads to the same conclusion. They were in a trap designed by a strategic genius, opposed by superior numbers who had the advantage of surprise, and there was nothing they could have done to prevent the massacre. Accepting this truth requires accepting helplessness, and helplessness is anathema to the Space Marine mindset. They are trained from the moment of their creation to be proactive, to seize the initiative, to impose their will upon the battlefield, to acknowledge that they were truly powerless at Isstvan, that no amount of skill or courage or determination could have changed the outcome, is to confront a fundamental limitation of their nature. It is easier to remain silent than to voice this admission, easier to carry the burden alone than to share it with younger brothers who still believe that sufficient determination can overcome any obstacle. The act of witnessing itself becomes a burden that grows heavier with time. The dreadnoughts at Isstvan did not just experience the massacre, they bore witness to it. Their optical sensors recorded it, their audio pickups captured it, their tactical cogitators analyzed it. All of this data was preserved in their mechanical systems, an archive of the Imperium's darkest hour, stored in the brain of a warrior who cannot die and cannot forget. This role as witness carries an implicit responsibility. If you are the only one who saw something, who recorded it, who can testify to exactly what happened, then you bear a duty to preserve that testimony. You become a living record, a primary source for future historians and strategists. Your memories are not just personal experiences, but crucial historical data that could inform decisions affecting billions of lives. For the Isstvan dreadnoughts, this responsibility is crushing. They know that their recollections of the massacre are probably the most accurate accounts that exist. They know that librarians and chapter historians would value their testimony, that strategic analyses could be refined with their input, that lessons could be learned from their observations. But they also know that to share these memories would be to give them new life, to make them real for another generation of Space Marines who might be better off not knowing certain details. What value is there in describing the exact sound a Space Marine's armor makes when it is breached by a brother's chainsword? What purpose is served by cataloging the different ways loyalists died as traitors they had trusted, murdered them from behind? What lesson can be drawn from the precise sequence of events that led to Ferrus Manus's beheading? These details exist in the dreadnoughts' memories with crystalline clarity, but sharing them would only spread the poison of that knowledge. Moreover, they understand that their testimony would be incomplete even at its most detailed. They can describe what they saw and heard and recorded. They can provide tactical analysis of the battle's progression. They can identify specific units and individuals who participated. But they cannot convey the feeling of that moment, the visceral shock of betrayal, the psychic weight of an entire legion's gene seed screaming out as thousands of brothers died simultaneously. These elements of the experience transcend data and recording, existing in a realm of consciousness that cannot be adequately translated into words or numbers. So they are left in a state of isolated witness. They carry the truth of Isstvan inside themselves, preserved but not shared, recorded but not transmitted. They are living monuments to a tragedy that the Imperium acknowledges but does not fully comprehend. And in their silence, they protect both themselves and their younger brothers from having to grapple with the full weight of what happened on that cursed world. There is also the matter of self-preservation, both psychological and practical. The dreadnoughts who survived Isstvan have continued to function for 10,000 years since that day. They have fought in countless battles, offered counsel on innumerable strategic decisions, and served as anchors of tradition and continuity for their chapters. This continued service required them to compartmentalize their trauma, to wall off the memories of Isstvan, so that they could continue to operate effectively. Speaking about the massacre would risk breaking down those walls. It would require them to engage with the memories not as archived data, but as lived experience. It would demand that they process the emotional content of what they witnessed, something they have deliberately avoided doing for millennia. The risk is not just psychological discomfort, but actual functional impairment. If the trauma were to overwhelm their carefully maintained equilibrium, they might become unreliable in combat, might make decisions based on past fear rather than present need, might lose the ability to serve their chapter effectively. For a dreadnought, the imperative to serve is paramount. They have already given up everything that made them fully human. They have sacrificed their bodies, their capacity for physical sensation, their ability to live normal lives. They have accepted entombment in a metal sarcophagus, have endured centuries or millennia of stasis sleep, all in service to the Emperor and the Imperium. To risk losing the ability to continue that service by reopening psychological wounds would be a betrayal of the very reason they accepted interment in the first place. There is a grim irony in this. The same perfect recall that preserves the traumatic memories also preserves the imperative to serve. The Dreadnoughts remember not just the horror of Isstvan, but also the oaths they swore, the purpose that has sustained them, the belief that their sacrifice serves a greater good. To compromise that service by dwelling on trauma would be to dishonor the memory of every brother who died so that they could escape. The dead of Isstvan cannot be brought back, cannot be avenged in any meaningful way, but they can be honored through continued service. Silence about the details of their deaths is a small price to pay for maintaining the capacity to serve. And there is the question of what speaking would accomplish. If the Dreadnoughts were to break their silence, were to provide detailed accounts of every horror they witnessed at Isstvan, what would change? The Imperium already knows that a massacre occurred. The chapters already understand that the traitor legions are their mortal enemies. The strategic lessons of the battle have been learned and incorporated into doctrine. What additional value would be provided by more granular details, by more visceral descriptions, by more complete testimony? The answer, from the perspective of the ancient warriors themselves, is likely very little. The younger Space Marines would gain knowledge but not wisdom, would understand facts but not meaning. They would hear about betrayal without experiencing it, would learn about loss without feeling it. The gap between second-hand knowledge and first-hand experience is too wide to bridge through mere description. All that would be accomplished is the burdening of the next generation with details that cannot be fully comprehended, but that would nevertheless weigh upon them. There is, in this silence, a kind of mercy. By refusing to speak in detail about Isstvan, the ancient dreadnoughts spare their younger brothers from carrying mental images of horrors they did not witness. They allow the massacre to remain at a certain level of abstraction, terrible, but not viscerally so, tragic, but not psychologically crippling. This is not coddling or weakness. It is a recognition that some knowledge, once shared, cannot be unlearned, and that there is value in protecting others from trauma that serves no constructive purpose. When the Isstvan dreadnoughts do speak about the heresy era, their accounts are notable for what they omit as much as for what they include. They will discuss tactics and strategy. They will describe the capabilities of traitor legion forces. They will provide assessments of enemy leadership and identify weaknesses that can be exploited in current conflicts. But they will speak in abstractions, in analytical terms that divorce events from emotional content. A typical account might note that the second wave of forces at Isstvan was positioned to maximize killing efficiency and minimize loyalist escape options. It might analyze the specific weapon loadouts employed by the traitor legions and explain how these were optimized for fratricide. It might even acknowledge the death of Ferrus Manus as a significant tactical blow that disrupted loyalist command structure. What it will not include is any description of how it felt to watch these events unfold, any admission of the psychological cost of bearing witness, any acknowledgement of the enduring trauma carried by those who survived. This clinical detachment serves multiple purposes. It allows the Dreadnought to fulfill their role as historical witness and tactical advisor without compromising their emotional defenses. It provides useful information to younger brothers without burdening them with the psychological weight of that information. And it maintains the dignity of the ancient warrior, preventing them from being seen as damaged or unreliable due to trauma. But this detachment also creates a gap in the historical record. Future generations learn the tactical details of Isstvan, but not the human cost. They understand that a massacre occurred, but not what it meant to experience betrayal on such a scale. They know that the Imperium was fractured, but not what it felt like to live through that fracturing. Important context is lost, context that might have made them more cautious about trust, more aware of the fragility of unity, more appreciative of the bonds that hold them together. The Dreadnoughts are aware of this gap and accept it as necessary. They have made the calculation that the costs of speaking openly outweigh the benefits of historical completeness. They have decided, individually and collectively, that their silence serves the greater good even if it leaves questions unanswered and lessons unlearned. This is not an easy choice, but it is a deliberate one, made by warriors who have had 10,000 years to consider the implications. There are rare moments when fragments of the truth emerge. A Dreadnought might let slip a detail during a particularly stressful battle, when the heat of combat temporarily lowers the walls they have built around their memories. An ancient warrior might make an offhand comment that reveals more than intended, a reference to a specific sound or sight that carries unexpected weight. In their sleep, during the dreams that sometimes trouble even stasis-locked consciousness, they might vocalize fragments of memory that are overheard by tech marines performing maintenance. These fragments are treasured by those who hear them, compiled by librarians, and analyzed by scholars. But they remain fragments, disconnected pieces that do not form a complete picture. It is like trying to reconstruct a mosaic when most of the pieces are missing, and those that remain are deliberately chosen to reveal as little as possible. The overall image can be inferred, but the specific details, the elements that would make it truly comprehensible, remain hidden. The Dreadnoughts are content with this state of affairs. They would rather be remembered as reliable warriors and sage advisors than as broken victims of historical trauma. They would rather their younger brothers see them as symbols of continuity and resilience than as cautionary tales about the cost of survival. Their silence protects not just themselves and others, but also their legacy, ensuring that they are honored for their service rather than pitied for their suffering. The burden of being the last witnesses to an era is almost incomprehensible. As the centuries and millennia pass, as more and more of those who fought in the Horus heresy die or fall to the corruption they once opposed, the surviving Dreadnoughts become increasingly isolated in their knowledge. They are the last ones who remember not just the facts of the heresy, but the lived experience of it. They alone can testify to what it was like when the galaxy changed, when the Imperium broke, when brother first raised weapon against brother on a galactic scale. This isolation is compounded by the nature of Dreadnought existence. Between battles, they sleep in stasis, removed from the flow of time in a way that normal beings cannot comprehend. When they wake, decades or centuries might have passed. Brothers they knew might be long dead. The political landscape might have shifted dramatically. New threats might have emerged while they slumbered. Each awakening is a small death, a confrontation with the reality of their own removal from the normal progression of life. For a Dreadnought who fought at Isstvan, this cycle of sleep and waking creates a particularly painful pattern. They wake to find that the number of other veterans who remember the heresy has decreased. Each awakening brings them closer to being the sole surviving witness from their legion or chapter. Eventually, they may reach a point where they are the only one left who can speak from direct experience about events that shaped the entire galaxy. This burden of soul witnessing is crushing. If you are the only one who remembers something, the only one who can testify to its truth, then that knowledge becomes your responsibility to preserve. But how do you preserve knowledge that is too painful to speak about? How do you honor the duty of witness when bearing witness would break you? The Dreadnoughts grapple with these questions every time they wake, every time a younger brother asks about the heresy, every time they stand in the halls where other ancients once stood, but now stand no more. The practical reality is that some knowledge will die with them. When the last Dreadnought who fought at Isstvan finally falls in battle or succumbs to the degradation of their ancient systems, certain truths about that day will be lost forever. Future generations will have only second-hand accounts, tactical analyses, and whatever fragments the ancients chose to share. The visceral reality of the betrayal, the specific character of that particular horror, will pass out of living memory and into history, becoming abstract and distant. The Dreadnoughts know this. They understand that their silence means some knowledge will be lost. They have made peace with this inevitability, or as much peace as warriors who have been fighting for 10,000 years can make with anything. They accept that there are things more important than historical completeness, that protecting the living sometimes requires letting certain truths die with the dead. But this acceptance does not come without cost. Each Dreadnought who falls takes with them perspectives and insights that can never be recovered. Each ancient warrior who passes represents not just the loss of a powerful combat asset, but the closing of a window into the past. The younger generations lose access to living history, to eyewitness testimony that could have informed their understanding of their own origins and purpose. This loss is recognized and mourned, even if what is being lost cannot be fully articulated. There is also the question of what future Dreadnoughts will be told about Isstvan. When a space marine from the Iron Hands or Salamanders or Raven Guard is interred in a Dreadnought chassis in the 41st Millennium, they join a brotherhood of the entombed that stretches back to the founding of their legion. They become part of a lineage of ancient warriors, each passing on knowledge and tradition to their successors. But what knowledge about Isstvan do the ancient survivors pass on to these new Dreadnoughts? The answer appears to be very little. The ancient Dreadnoughts teach tactics and strategy. They share technical knowledge about weapon systems and enemy capabilities. They offer counsel on chapter politics and provide historical context for current conflicts. But they do not share their personal experiences of the Horus heresy in any detailed way. They do not describe what it felt like to be at Isstvan. They do not burden new Dreadnoughts with the trauma they themselves carry. This creates a kind of generational divide within the Dreadnought Brotherhood. There are the true ancients, those who remember the heresy era directly, and there are the younger Dreadnoughts, interred over the past 10,000 years, who know of that era only through second-hand accounts. The younger Dreadnoughts may revere the ancients, may seek their counsel and try to learn from their experience. But they do not truly understand what sets these oldest warriors apart. They see the behavioral patterns, the reluctance to discuss certain topics, the subtle signs of trauma that manifest even after millennia, but they do not know the cause. In a way, this is exactly what the ancient Dreadnoughts want. They would rather the younger members of the Brotherhood not understand, not carry the same psychological weight. Let them be effective warriors, unburdened by knowledge of betrayals that occurred before they were even created. Let them fight without the shadow of Isstvan hanging over every battle. Let them trust their allies without the paranoid awareness that such trust can be weaponized. This is the gift the ancients give through their silence, the possibility of a less damaged relationship with the present. The psychological mechanisms that allow Dreadnoughts to function despite extreme trauma are complex and not fully understood even by the Adeptus Mechanicus who maintain them. The integration of human consciousness with machine systems creates new patterns of thought and experience that do not map neatly onto normal human psychology. The ability to compartmentalize, to separate traumatic memories from operational effectiveness, seems to be enhanced by the mechanical aspects of their nature. But this compartmentalization is not perfect, and it comes with costs. The Dreadnoughts may be able to function in combat, may be able to provide tactical advice and strategic counsel, but they do so while carrying wounds that never heal. The trauma of Isstvan is not processed or resolved. It is merely walled off, contained but never truly addressed. This creates a kind of psychological time bomb, always present, always threatening to breach containment if the walls are damaged. This is part of why the Dreadnoughts are so reluctant to speak about Isstvan. Breaking silence would mean engaging directly with the walled-off memories, would risk triggering the trauma in ways that might compromise their carefully maintained equilibrium. It is safer to leave the walls intact, to keep the memories locked away behind layers of silence and denial, than to risk the consequences of confronting them directly. The younger Space Marines who interact with these ancient warriors often sense that something is being held back, that there are depths of experience that are not being shared. They may ask questions, may press for more details, may express frustration at the ancients' reticence. But the wise among them learn to respect the silence, to understand that some questions should not be asked because the answers would help no one. This mutual understanding, this unspoken agreement to not probe too deeply into the ancients' experiences at Isstvan, becomes part of the chapter's culture. It is understood that the ancient Dreadnoughts carry burdens that younger brothers cannot comprehend. It is accepted that there are limits to what can be shared, boundaries that should not be crossed. This creates a kind of protective distance, allowing the ancients to maintain their dignity and functional effectiveness, while sparing the younger brothers from knowledge that would only trouble them. As we approach the end of our exploration into why the Isstvan Dreadnoughts will not speak, we must acknowledge a fundamental truth. Some experiences transcend the capacity of language to communicate. There are events so profound, traumas so deep, betrayals so complete, that no combination of words can adequately convey their nature to someone who was not present. Isstvan represents such an experience. The drop site massacre was not just a battle. It was not merely a tactical defeat or a strategic setback. It was a fundamental break in the continuity of the Imperium, a moment when everything that the Space Marine legions believed about themselves and each other was proven false. The warriors who witnessed this break, who experienced the visceral shock of that betrayal, carry knowledge that exists beyond the realm of description. They know what it felt like when the universe revealed itself to be far more cruel and chaotic than anyone had imagined. They understand, in a way that cannot be taught or explained, what was lost when the legions shattered. This knowledge is their burden to carry, and carry it they do. For 10,000 years, they have borne the weight of Isstvan inside their metal shells, never speaking of it in detail, never fully sharing what they witnessed. They have continued to serve, have fought in countless battles, have offered counsel to innumerable commanders, all while maintaining their silence about the one event that defines their existence more than any other. This silence is not weakness. It is not forgetfulness or denial. It is a choice made consciously and maintained deliberately by warriors who understand that some truths are too heavy to be shared. They protect their younger brothers from knowledge that would not make them stronger or wiser, only more burdened. They protect themselves from having to relive trauma that has already been compartmentalized for the sake of continued function. And they protect the memory of those who died at Isstvan by refusing to reduce their deaths to mere data points in a tactical analysis. The Imperium is built on sacrifice. Every day, millions of soldiers die in defense of humanity. Every battle claims lives that will never be properly commemorated or remembered. The dead of Isstvan are just a fraction of the total cost of the Horus heresy, which itself is just one chapter in 10,000 years of constant warfare. In this context, it might seem that the silence of the Isstvan Dreadnoughts is insignificant, that their personal trauma pales in comparison to the broader pattern of suffering that defines the 41st millennium. But this misses the point. The silence of the Isstvan Dreadnoughts is significant precisely because it is personal, because it represents individual consciousness, grappling with experiences that defy comprehension. These are not faceless casualties in a statistical report. These are warriors who have names, who have histories, who have continued to exist and to serve despite carrying psychological wounds that would have destroyed lesser beings. Their silence is a testament to the human capacity for resilience and the terrible cost of that resilience. When we encounter an ancient dreadnought, when we see these massive war machines stomping across battlefields or standing silent vigil in chapter monasteries, we should remember that we are in the presence of walking monuments to trauma. We are looking at warriors who have survived things we cannot imagine, who carry burdens we cannot comprehend, who continue to fight despite having every reason to simply give up. Their silence about Isstvan is part of what allows them to continue, part of the psychological architecture that keeps them functional and effective. Respecting that silence means honoring their sacrifice. It means accepting that there are limits to what can be known, experiences that cannot be fully shared, truths that must remain the private burden of those who witnessed them. It means not pushing for details that would serve our curiosity, but damage those who would have to provide them. It means understanding that the gap in the historical record, the absence of first-hand accounts from the dreadnoughts themselves, is itself meaningful and should not be thoughtlessly filled. The younger generations of Space Marines are taught to revere the ancient dreadnoughts, to seek their wisdom and honor their service. This reverence should include respecting their right to silence, their choice to not speak in detail about the worst day of their existence. When an ancient warrior falls silent at the mention of Isstvan, when they deflect questions or change the subject, the proper response is not persistence, but acceptance. They have earned the right to choose what they share and what they keep to themselves. As we look to the future, as the Imperium continues its slow decline, while fighting to hold back the darkness, the day will inevitably come when the last dreadnought who fought at Isstvan will fall. Whether destroyed in battle, lost to the degradation of ancient systems, or finally granted the peace of true death, that warrior's passing will mark the end of an era. When that day comes, the last living link to the drop site massacre will be severed, and all that will remain will be the second-hand accounts, the tactical analyses, and the fragments of testimony that the ancients chose to share. This loss is inevitable, and in some ways, perhaps it is fitting. Isstvan was an ending, the death of the unified Imperium and the dream of the Great Crusade. It makes a certain grim sense that all living memory of that ending should itself eventually end, passing into history and then into myth. The silence of the dreadnoughts, maintained throughout their service, will become a permanent silence as their voices are stilled forever. But until that day comes, they continue to serve. They wake from stasis when called, take to the battlefield when needed, and offer counsel when asked. They carry their burden of silence with the same stoic determination they bring to every other aspect of their existence. They are monuments to resilience, testaments to the possibility of continuing despite unbearable loss, examples of duty maintained in the face of trauma that would have broken anyone else. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war and the laughter of thirsting gods, the silence of the Isstvan dreadnoughts stands as a small but significant truth. Some wounds never heal, some memories are too painful to share, some burdens must be carried alone. These ancient warriors understand this and have made their peace with it. They ask nothing from us, but to be allowed to continue serving, to fight and die as they have for 10,000 years, unburdened by expectations that they share what cannot be adequately communicated. This is their gift to us, the continuation of their service despite their trauma. This is their sacrifice, carrying memories that poison the mind so that others need not carry them. This is their choice, to remain silent, not out of inability, but out of recognition that some truths serve no purpose when spoken aloud. So when you encounter an ancient dreadnought, when you stand in the presence of a warrior who might have been at Isstvan, remember this: you are looking at someone who has seen the Imperium break and has carried that sight inside themselves for longer than your civilization has existed. You are in the presence of trauma so profound it transcends description. And you are witnessing an act of will so powerful that it has sustained consciousness and purpose across millennia, despite every reason to surrender to despair. Honor them not by demanding they break their silence, but by accepting it. Respect them not by pushing for stories they do not wish to tell, but by understanding that some stories are too heavy to be shared. Learn from them not by extracting every detail of their experience, but by observing how they continue to serve despite carrying burdens that would crush anyone else. The Isstvan dreadnoughts will not describe what that day felt like. They will not give you the visceral details of betrayal and slaughter. They will not share the specific moments when they watched their primarchs fall or their brothers die. This is their right, earned through millennia of service and oceans of sacrifice. Their silence is not a wall to be broken down, but a boundary to be respected. Behind that silence lies pain too deep for words, and knowledge too heavy for sharing. In the end, the silence of the Isstvan dreadnoughts teaches us something important about trauma, memory, and the cost of service. It reminds us that there are experiences that cannot be adequately communicated, that some burdens must be carried individually, that the choice to speak or to remain silent about one's own suffering is deeply personal and must be honored. These ancient warriors have given everything in service to the Emperor and the Imperium. Their silence about Isstvan is the one thing they have kept for themselves, and we owe them the respect of not demanding they give up even that. So the next time someone asks why the ancient dreadnoughts won't talk about Isstvan, the answer is simple: because they carry that day inside themselves like a wound that never heals. Because speaking of it would serve no purpose but to spread the poison of that knowledge, because some experiences exist beyond the capacity of language to convey, and because after 10,000 years of service, they have earned the right to choose what they share and what they keep locked away in the vaults of their mechanical minds. Let that be enough. Let their silence stand as its own testimony. And let us honor these ancient warriors not by trying to extract every detail of their trauma, but by accepting that some things should remain unspoken, some memories should stay buried, and some burdens are too heavy to be shared. Before we wrap up, if you found this deep dive into the silent suffering of the Imperium's most ancient warriors engaging, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more explorations into the dark corners of Warhammer 40k lore. The universe is filled with untold stories and hidden truths, and we're here to bring them to light, one video at a time. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever wondered about the perspectives of these ancient warriors? What other aspects of Dreadnought existence would you like us to explore? Your engagement helps us create better content and dive deeper into the lore you love. Until next time, remember that in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But there is also the silence of those who have seen too much and chosen to bear that burden alone. The Emperor protects even those who can no longer be fully protected from their own memories.